Good morning, nerds. Welcome to the latest installment of Unity Basics. This is a series based around gameplay tutorials for simple gameplay elements. This is intended for like extreme newbies. We're going to get a little bit into code, but not too heavy. If you're looking for the more detailed coding explanations, this will get you started, but it's not going to get you all the way there. But we will cover some code, we'll cover some Unity. There we go. Okay, what I've done here is today we're going to be talking about 3D movement. So that's movement in your X, Y, and Z, or for our Canadian and British friends, Z directions. And what we're going to be doing here is I've created a basic project, a basic 3D project, using the Core 3D template found in Unity 2021.1. But as with all of the tutorials in this series, really everything I'm going to show you would work as far back as Unity 5.5 at least, if not further, and would work in the current versions of Unity just fine, so you don't need to worry about it. Also, I'm using Visual Studio 2019, but honestly, any version is probably going to work as long as you've got your IntelliSense. That's really important. So, because we're trying to work in 3D, we're going to start adding in some 3D objects to play around with. I'm going to show you some quick and dirty texturing as well, materials work, because things are kind of hard to see. A little bit of camera adjustment too. And this tutorial is going to be great for basic control of movement. It's not going to do very well for first-person movement, and we'll get into that later on when I do a more first-person tutorial. But basically, we're using the world axis for our motion rather than the character's forward, backwards, reverse, and so that's going to make it very, very difficult to say which direction you're going in. So this is a good method to use if you're trying to use what we call a fixed camera. The camera's not going anywhere. As opposed to one that would follow you around. So this would work for a third-person game, or something like Diablo, something like that. It's not going to work very well for your EverQuest and World of Warcraft and things like that. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start off. We need to have some things to move, and we need to have some things to move around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create myself. I'm going to right-click in my hierarchy here. And we are going to go down to 3D object, and I'm just going to give myself a plane to work with. The one thing I do want to validate, which it's not, so I'm glad that we're checking, is that it is zeroed out. So what we mean by that is that my position and rotation are all zeros, and my scale is all ones. And as you can see, my plane is starting up at y1, which is going to mess with me later. So I'm going to set that to 0. And my z is at -10, which again I want at 0. So it's some slight adjustments, but actually, you know what? I'm going to undo that real fast. If you're following along, just make sure everything is zeros and ones. But I'm going to undo that real fast. And if I click on my game window as my camera, you'll notice you can't even see that plane. But if I switch it and I go back to where I wanted to, which is again 0 and 0, now all of a sudden that plane is right there in front of me. But it's still kind of ugly, and it's still a little hard to see. And so what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the camera. And right now the camera is, you can kind of see the lines here, but the camera is looking straight on at that plane. And really, I want it kind of doing a downward angle look. So what we're going to do is we're just going to grab that Y on that camera, and we're going to drag it up a little bit. Notice that I am clicked on the main camera for this. We're going to grab that y-axis, we're going to move it up a bit, and I'm moving it up just past the point where I can kind of see the plane going off screen here. And I'm going to adjust the camera's rotation on the X value to about 20 degrees. And then I'm going to just kind of nudge my Y's and Z's until the plane is kind of just kissing the bottom of the screen there. And that's going to give me, when I go into my game view, I've got a plane, I can see what's going on, everything is good. Okay, time to add a new object. This is going to be a wall on the back of the plane. Not quite the whole back, we're going to give it a little bit of room. But I'm going to call this cube, so I'm going to, sorry, let me undo that real fast. That way I can walk through it a little bit quicker, or cleaner, I mean. Right click, I'm going to go to a 3D object. I'm going to create a cube. Again, I'm going to relabel that. I don't like the label there because I want to be able to tell my cubes apart. We're going to call this one wall. And again, I'm going to look at my stuff. I'm at z negative 10. You can't see a darn thing there. So I'm going to put it back at 0. And now, oh, and it's y1. So I'm going to put y at 0. And now what you can see is you can see it, sort of. It's hard to see there on the screen. And you can also, it's not very cube-like. It's more of a flat rectangle. And that's because half the cube is below the plane. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust this to y 0.5. And you're going to notice that that puts the whole cube above the ground. And that's because it has a height of 1, but that's measured from the center. So it's 0.5 below, 0.5 above, which means if I move it up by 0.5, that other 0.5 will show, and we can see our cube. And that's a pretty common thing we've got to do with 3D assets is figure out like its height and divide it by 2 a lot. So there's some quick head math that we have to do pretty regularly. Anyways, so the next problem I've got here is it's going to be hard to demonstrate anything because I can't see. So I'm gonna just do some quick painting of objects here. I'm going to make some fast materials. And so what I'm going to do here is in my assets folder, I'm going to right click, I'm going to create a new folder because we want to be organized. I'm going to call this folder materials. And what we're going to be doing today is called clowning. And that's basically, we're just going to take bright, bold colors and throw them on things just so we can tell what's what and see things apart. This isn't fancy texturing. I might do a tutorial on that later, but this is kind of quick and dirty just to get some color on the screen so we can see things. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new material, and that's about midway down the menu. And you're going to see what it looks like if I were to apply it to an object is over here on the right. And right now I'm going to name this material, let's call this one green. Naturally this will be green when I'm done. It's not very green right now. The defaults are probably okay, but what I'm going to do here is go to this albedo color. We're going to switch this, and I'm just going to give it kind of a medium darkish green. And if you want to, you can play around with things like the metallic, which makes it more reflective. I'm going to leave that alone. And the smoothness, which makes it shinier. I'm going to dull it a little bit. So I'm going to kind of move it more towards 0.25-ish. That's fine. And that'll make it a little bit less shiny. And then all you've got to do to color an object is drag it onto the object. So I'm going to grab my new material that I've just created. I'm going to drag it onto that plane. That should work. Oh, I'm in the game view. You can't be in game view for this. You need to be in scene view. So I'm going to kind of use my mouse to kind of move over around so I can see things. Again, I'm going to drag that green in, and you're going to see that it just took right away. And then for my wall, I want blue. And since I've already got my settings kind of how I like them with this green, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use another Unity trick that I really like, which is duplicate. And you can access that. As we saw in the first tutorial, you can duplicate by doing a right click and say, oh, I thought it was on that one. Apparently it's not. I think you can do it from the hierarchy that way. But I can do edit duplicate. And you're going to see the shortcut is Control D if you're on Windows, Command D if you're on Mac. And despite being on a Mac, I'm just going to use the Windows keys. So I'm going to use Control as my verbal reference when I talk to you guys. But anything I do that's Control, like for example, this is Control D, you could do with Command on a Mac. So everything in Unity is pretty universal that way. So I'm going to take this green, it's titled Green 1 since it's a copy. I'm going to relabel this, and I'm just going to call this one Blue. And unsurprisingly, I'm going to go up to my color picker. I'm going to click on the color. I'm going to jump down here and grab myself a nice little blue. And I'm going to put that on the wall. And now let's talk about how that wall should look. At least now I can see it. What we're going to do here is I'm going to push the wall. And I want to be careful about my axes because I've kind of rotated myself out. The camera's kind of facing this way. So I want to grab the blue arrow. Regardless of where you are on your screen and what you see, please grab the blue arrow and drag it out to the side. Drag it close to the edge. Don't go all the way. Leave yourself a little bit of padding there because we are going to want to give the player something to move around. So I want him to have some of that space back there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to scaling. And the way we scale, you can either click the button up here. It's the third button, so this is actually it'd be the fourth. This is grab things and move them around, which doesn't work terribly great. We can use the actual move tool, which gives you your 3 arrows on the 3 axes. X is red, Y is green, and blue is Z. And that equates to, if you know RGB as a term, which is obvious is our color system, red, green, blue, RGB is equivalent to X, Y, and Z. So this is X, Y, and Z going in RGB order. Okay, so what I really want to do though is I want to scale. So I'm going to click on this little scale knob and I'm going to grab my X scale, which is the red one. Again, even if you're not in the same alignment as me, please grab the red one. And I'm going to drag that across and just kind of scale this up a little bit. I'm at 8.7, and let's knock that down to 8. That just feels better to me. Okay, so I'm going to scale that to about 8, and I'm going to change my Z. I like cleaner numbers. My Z is currently 2.88. I'm going to change that to 3. It nudges it back just a little bit. But now I have a blue wall kind of on the back of my thing, and you can see where my camera is. So relative to the camera, it's on the far end, and that's why I was really trying to be careful about, are you grabbing the red one or the blue one? Because I'm paying attention to where the camera is, and I want it on that back wall. If I click on my game preview, you can again see that it's on the back wall here. Okay, last thing I want to do is grab another 3D object. I'm going to grab another cube. I'm going to zero this guy out, and actually, since I know I'm going to need to be 0.5y, I'm going to go 0, 0.5, 0, and then my rotations are all 0, my scales are all 1. That's looking pretty good, and now we've got some space here. If I wanted to, I could color him, red like I did with the other tutorial that I did. The player was red and the walls were blue, but this time I think I'm just going to leave him alone. Okay, so looking at our objects, if you paid attention to the last tutorial, you would remember that we had to add box colliders to things. We don't have to do that in 3D with 3D objects. They automatically already come with an appropriate collider. If we do a capsule, it will come with a capsule collider. If we do a box, it will come with a box collider. If we do a capsule, a cylinder, it will come with a cylinder collider. So we don't really need to worry about this stuff. It's going to come with a collider. We do, however, I'm going to be using rigid body movement, and there's going to be a lot of bleed over with the previous tutorial on this. Because we are using rigid body movement, I can do add component, rigid body, and unlike the previous tutorial, we want to do just regular rigid body, not rigid body 2D. Okay, but like the previous tutorial, what I want to do is we are going to go ahead and add a new game object. We're going to call this one movement. And I'm going to go ahead and just do the new script thing, create an add. And now I have a new script called movement. Again, that is in my assets, just raw there, which I'm not a fan of. Anybody who's watched my videos knows I do like to keep my files organized. So we are going to go to create a new folder. We're going to call that kid scripts, drop movement in there. And normally I would click on cube and click on the movement file there. Actually, I still am going to do that. I just like that way better. So as soon as the hourglass of death ends, we're going to go to movement. We're going to double click on that script name. It's going to bring up our scripts. Okay, so the functionality for this is almost identical to the last one. So we're going to be able to go a little bit quicker through this tutorial than we did on some of the than we did last time. I'm going to go to public float speed equals 3. We're going to go rigid body, not rigid body 2D this time, but we need to access our own rigid body. So we're going to go rigid body RB. And just like last time, we are going to create a move vector, but we're going to make that a vector 3 because we're in 3D now instead of 2D. So we're going to go vector 3, move vector. And that's pretty good for now. Okay, in our start, just like last time, we're going to need to do the, we're going to need to detect that rigid body. So we're going to do RB equals get component rigid body. Again, do not do 2D. And now we're in update. And in the very, very end of the last tutorial, we learned how to take our inputs and merge them into a new vector. And we're just going to go straight to that trick this time. I could do independence. I don't have to. I could do the same thing. I could just do always move it forward. But when we're doing 3D, like we just want to jump straight to it, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to say move vector is equal to, and again, I need to generate a new vector 3 based on keyboard inputs and one static, and we'll talk about that in a second. So we're going to do new vector 3. Okay, and now I need to feed it an x, a y, and a z component. The x component, if we think about this in our normal space, to move horizontally, I'm going to want to use the left or right keys, which is the horizontal input system. So we're going to go input dot get axis, whoa, not gyro. How about get axis horizontal? Now, here's the tricky one, is what do we use for y? Well, since y is our vertical movement, and I really want my up and down keys to control my forward and back, because this is a 3D game, we don't normally use up and down to literally move us up and down. We usually use up and down to move us forwards and backwards, just because that's the convention for 3D. So I don't actually want to change my vertical at all. Potentially I might want to do this via a jump key or something, but for now we're just going to do 0. And input dot get axis for the z component, that again is going to want to be vertical. So we're just going to do vertical. And so what I have here is a mix of two variable components. They're both using input.getAxis, and I have a static variable, or static value rather, of 0, which is the amount of y change I'm going to want. So I have a move vector established, and at this point, all I've got to do is go into void fixed update. Actually, I'm just going to let that auto type. I'm going to type in fixed update and let that do its thing. And just like last time, I'm going to do rb.velocity is equal to my move vector times my speed. How about speed, not seed, yo? Okay, we're going to go ahead and save that. And let's see how we did. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and let that compile for a second. And it's sure trying. Okay, now if I click on my cube, which I actually want to rename that player while I'm in here. It's just a good habit to be in. Okay, I can look down here. It does have a speed of 3, and I'm remembering my last tutorial, and 3 was too slow. I remember settling on 10, so I'm just going to change it to 10 right now. I should have just done that in the code to begin with. I forgot. I was looking at my reference sheet, and so there we go. But I'm going to go ahead and just change that to 10 right now. Okay, let's go ahead and hit play. And what we should see is I am getting some weird. It's basically working, first off, but I am getting some tumbling going on here. If I just let him sit long enough, he should settle down. There we go. Okay, he does scrape a bit. And one of the problems that we're having right now is his constraints aren't locked, and so he is getting some friction off the ground. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of play around with our settings and fix that. And the easiest way to do that is I'm going to go into my constraints, and since we don't need rotation right now, I am just going to freeze his rotation across the board. So we're just not going to let him rotate at all. And if we do that, that ought to fix a lot of our problems. I could also, while I'm in here, it would make sense to freeze the Y position, because if I freeze the Y position, he's not capable of verticality at all. But there we go. So you will notice that he is subject to gravity right now. Let's just go ahead and turn that off too. I don't really need gravity right now, so we're going to turn that off. If I decide to do jumping later, I'm definitely going to have to turn that back on, but this is going to give us some basic movement with not a lot of fuss. And as with the last tutorial, I can collide with this wall, and it's not going to let me stop. Now, the one thing he is doing is, like with the last tutorial, I'm having that that slow drag movement, or not slow, but like slow out. So, like for example, if I move him to the left and I let go, he just kind of does that like slide into home. Okay, so what we need to do is I want to curb that, and we're going to fix that the exact same way as last time. So if I go up into my edit menu and I go into project settings, and I go back into the input manager, and again, I'm going to dock this up here just like I did in the last tutorial. We're going to open up our axes. Again, we're going to go into horizontal and vertical, and we're just going to change the gravity to a bunch of 9s. 5 is good. And we're going to do the exact same thing on vertical. Again, 5 9s. And again, the reason we have to do this, and especially if you didn't watch the last tutorial, the reason we have to do this is because the keyboard, this is simulating the release time you would have on something like a joystick axis. Like for example, if you're using the analog sticks on a controller, they don't immediately spring back to 0. There's like a turnover time, right? Like, or a come back to the center time. So when you let go, it drifts back to the center, and that's what this is trying to simulate. And I have forgotten, I'm still running the game right now, so if I go back into my input manager, those values will go back and they've reset themselves. This is a good lesson for you guys, it's a good lesson for me. So I'm going to go ahead and put back that, I don't know, I did 4 zeros that time, it doesn't really, or 4 9s that time, it doesn't really matter. As long as you get some 9s in there, it's going to be fast enough. I'm going to go back to my game. I'm going to hit play. And I've got pretty abrupt movement. It's stopping when I want to stop, or when I let go of the keyboard. And now we're in pretty good shape. So, we've got our 3-way movement working. Everything is groovy. If I wanted to, I could actually add another axis and control my character in 3D using, I don't know, maybe the Q and E keys or something like that, and change that 0 in the Y-axis to something else. But for now, I don't want to mess with that. This is a pretty good stopping point. So what we've covered today, we covered basically the exact same things we did in the previous tutorial. We covered adding some variables, we covered finding our rigid body, we covered creating a new vector, we covered using the fixed update to modify our velocity. We recovered going into your input manager and setting those gravity settings. And we even had a little bit of time to cover materials and how to add those in, and a little tiny bit of 3D object placement. So we managed to cram a lot into this one, despite it being a pretty simple project. And I think that's a pretty good stopping point. So if this tutorial was helpful for you, please click like and subscribe. And as always, when we close, please keep on creating. Have a wonderful day, everybody.